Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I jumped the gun. Madam Speaker, I seek leave to deliver a ministerial report on the 2025 federal budget.
Is leave granted? No. Leave is granted. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this morning I rise to speak about the disgraceful federal budget handed down in Canberra last night, which has profoundly let down the Northern Territory and every single one of its 255,000 residents. This week's federal budget wasn't even on the cards, Madam Speaker. The smart money assumed that we'd be heading to the polls on April 12, wiping out any chance of the usual March budget drama. But ex-tropical cyclone Alfred threw out all those plans, and now here we are, stuck with a budget that no one really expected, and it certainly shows, Madam Speaker. This is, without exaggeration, Madam Speaker, the worst federal budget ever handed down to the Northern Territory since we gained self-government back in 1978. Madam Speaker, Territorians have been given nothing short of a slap in the face by the Albanese Labor government. Consider this. Out of a staggering $786 billion in the total federal budget, an almost incomprehensible sum, the Northern Territory has received only one new conditional commitment of $200 million. And that's conditional, Madam Speaker. That's right, $200 million out of $786 billion. It's an insult, absolutely plain and simple. Contrast this with the clear and urgent priorities outlined by our own Chief Minister in a direct letter to the Prime Minister in December last year. The Chief Minister highlighted the crucial areas desperately needing attention: our defence capabilities, road infrastructure, gas development in the Beetaloo Basin, population growth initiatives, tailored migration policies, aviation improvements, resilience initiatives and mineral resource development. All of these critical points were clearly spelled out as fundamental, Madam Speaker, to the Territory's future. Yet what was Canberra's response last night? Complete and utter neglect. Labor has spent months promising Territorians the equivalent of a trip to Disneyland and raising hopes and expectations. But when it came time to deliver, Madam Speaker, all we got was enough funding for a modest night out at Time Zone in Casuarina. This morning on ABC Radio, we heard Labor Senator Malarndirri McCarthy trying to threaten Territorians that the feds will take their money away. The Senator made reference to how much money the feds contribute to our overall budget and that our CLP needed to be very careful in our language. Well, Madam Speaker, I've got news for Senator McCarthy. This isn't your money, it's taxpayers' money. The money of hard-working Australians and hard-working Territorians who, under your total failure of a Labor government, are struggling to make ends meet. How dare the Senator threaten to stand over Territorians because we are doing what's right and standing up for the people of the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. We are calling it for what it is a sham. But, Madam Speaker, this is how the Labor Party rolls. When they get challenged, they don't like it. And then in the next breath, they threaten to take our money away. Madam Speaker, it's time for Senator McCarthy, Marion Scrimgeour and Luke Gosling to take a long, hard look at themselves. All three have failed the Territory miserably. Madam Speaker, it is absolutely outrageous, and the insult doesn't end there. One of the critical issues facing the Territory is the uncertainty surrounding the Darwin port. It's crucial infrastructure, not just for our economy, but also for our national security and defence interests. But what clarity or certainty did we receive last night? I can tell you, Madam Speaker, absolutely none. Labor's federal member for Solomon, Luke Gosling, has repeatedly promised Territorians that announcements were imminent, claiming a public-private partnership was on the horizon. Well, Madam Speaker, the budget has made crystal clear exactly how much weight Luke Gosling carries in Canberra. His own federal colleagues have cut him loose completely. He's been left isolated, floating aimlessly and looking utterly irrelevant. Around Darwin and the top end, we have a word for that. He's behaving like a goose, Madam Speaker. And now it seems Canberra thinks exactly the same. Darwin Port isn't some minor project. It's essential infrastructure, vital to our trade, crucial for industry and a fundamental piece for creating and protecting jobs in the Territory. Given its strategic role in Australia's defence capabilities and regional security, you would think it would be front and centre of any responsible federal government thinking. But clearly Labor doesn't see it that way. If Prime Minister Anthony Albanese could find some time and money to secure steel production in Whyalla, why can't he offer the same certainty for support of the Darwin port? Madam Speaker, the reality is that the federal Labor government does not see us as equally important. We are an afterthought at best, so it seems. We're a distant speck on the Canberra radar, and that is an absolute disgrace and shameful and disgusting for all Territorians. We have made a compelling case to Canberra for bold initiatives, including tax incentives to encourage people to live and work here, to revive our population growth, retain skilled workers and incentivise investment in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. Yet Labor's federal budget completely ignored these essential measures to boost our economy and our community. Additionally, we requested flexible migration policies tailored to the Territory's unique circumstances, streamlined visa processes and incentives to attract skilled migrants, alleviate skill shortages and effectively service remote areas. Once again, Canberra's budget last night provided nothing to address these pressing needs. But Madam Speaker, Luke Gosling isn't the only culprit here. Territorians have two other Labor representatives in Canberra, Marion Scrimgeour and Malandiri McCarthy. And what exactly have these representatives been doing, I ask, Madam Speaker? Where are their voices in this federal budget to support the Northern Territory? Have they stood up for Territorians? Have they argued passionately on our behalf? The evidence last night says loud and clear they have not. Instead, all three of our Labor representatives have sat silent while billions were showered on other parts of regional Australia. Other regional areas are seeing transformative projects, funding boosts that will create jobs and drive growth. And what have we been offered? A paltry maintenance budget, routine funds that keep things tickling along but achieve absolutely nothing in terms of real growth or prosperity for the people of the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, now let's talk about Middle Arm. Here we have an economic goldmine, a precinct perfectly situated for industrial expansion, liquid natural gas export and mineral processing. It has everything, Madam Speaker: strategically positioned, proximity to our major international shipping routes and incredible potential to generate thousands of new jobs. But in Canberra last night, what did we see for Middle Arm? Nothing. Not a single dollar was specifically allocated to accelerate its development. All the funding sits there in Infrastructure Australia and is equity funding. There was no cash allocated. This is economic negligence, Madam Speaker. It's deliberate neglect by federal Labor, and Territorians should see this for exactly what it is: absolute contempt. The Chief Minister has clearly emphasised to the Prime Minister that roads like the Stuart Highway, Barclay and Victoria highways are lifelines for industry, tourism and remote communities, and that improving these roads is strategically vital. Despite their critical importance to economic development and regional connectivity, Canberra's budget last night failed to provide even a single cent towards this essential infrastructure. And it's not just about economic projects. Madam Speaker, let's look at Kakadu National Park. This iconic World Heritage Site, a jewel of Australian tourism and Indigenous heritage, has been overlooked once again. 6 years ago, Luke Gosling stood proudly next to then opposition leader Bill Shorten and pledged $220 million for Kakadu. 6 years later, Madam Speaker, what's been delivered? Absolutely nothing. Zero. Donuts, not even crumbs. The neglect extends further. Our Chief Minister explicitly called on Canberra to provide better access to affordable and reliable air travel, highlighting its critical role in boosting tourism, supporting local business and improving the quality of life right across the Territory. Yet Canberra's federal budget made no effort to improve aviation connectivity. Is Kakadu no longer important to Labor? Does its cultural heritage mean nothing to Anthony Albanese and his colleagues? Apparently it seems not. Adding to this neglect, we have specifically urged Canberra for federal investment in resilience and capacity building initiatives, emphasising how frequently the Territory faces natural disasters and extreme weather events. Yet again, Canberra has ignored this critical need, leaving our communities and infrastructure vulnerable. Madam Speaker, what about the Beetaloo? Here lies one of Australia's most promising natural gas reserves, a 30,000 square kilometre area capable of transforming the Territory's energy landscape, fuelling domestic demand and powering international markets. Given Australia's current energy challenges, you'd expect federal Labor to prioritise such a resource. But last night, Madam Speaker, the budget completely ignored it. Again, not a cent, not $1 to accelerate development in the Beetaloo Basin. This is neglect, Madam Speaker, on the highest order. Just months ago, we urged the Prime Minister, after his visit for the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, to provide federal support to help the Beetaloo Basin reach full productivity and capacity, highlighting its enormous potential to secure Australia's energy independence, reduce domestic energy costs and position the Territory as a leading energy exporter. But this critical appeal has fallen on deaf ears, Madam Speaker. The Albanese Labor government seems oblivious to the strategic importance of the Territory. They simply don't grasp our potential, our capability or our value to the entire nation. And this now brings me, Madam Speaker, to defence infrastructure, another critical area neglected by federal Labor. Given our geographical proximity to Asia, the Territory plays an indispensable role in Australia's defence posture. Our military installations such as Larrakia Barracks in Darwin, the RAF bases at Tyndall near Katherine aren't optional extras. They are fundamental to national security. The Northern Territory provides Australia's frontline defence, acting as vital surveillance hub over the entire Indo-Pacific region. Yet despite this strategic imperative, last night's budget delivered nothing new. No additional investment to enhance our defence infrastructure or our capabilities. It has been highlighted to the Prime Minister that the Northern Territory is a critical front line for national security, stressing that additional troops and investment are urgently needed, both behind the wire and beyond, to bolster our defence capabilities and support our long-term economic growth. Yet last night, Madam Speaker, Canberra completely ignored that strategic imperative. Madam Speaker, Labor seems to misunderstand or deliberately ignore the significance of the Northern Territory in Australia's defence planning. We are not just on the front line, Madam Speaker, we are the front line. We host crucial deployments of allied forces, particularly the United States Marines and now the Japanese Self-Defence Force, enhancing Australia's defence readiness and our relationships in the region. How can any federal government serious about national security overlook additional investment in our all too critical defence infrastructure? It absolutely beggars belief, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Territorians have every right to feel angry today. We contribute greatly to the nation, providing economic opportunities, strategic defence capabilities, cultural richness and a unique environmental assets. We are on the front line, as I've said, Madam Speaker. Yet in return, all we receive are scraps from Canberra's table. Labor's three federal representatives, Luke Gosling, Marion Scrimgeour and Malarndirri McCarthy, have failed spectacularly in advocating for us, advocating for the people of the Northern Territory. Their silence and lack of action in Canberra has damaged our prospects. They should hang their heads in shame. Madam Speaker, Territorians deserve absolutely better. We deserve a federal government that recognises our immense potential and invests accordingly. We deserve representatives who fight passionately and tirelessly, who put the Territory first every single day, Madam Speaker. This budget was a test for the Albanese Labor government. It was their chance to demonstrate a genuine commitment to our Northern Territory. It was their opportunity to deliver on countless promises and finally show that Territorians really matter. But instead, they've abandoned us. They've left us behind. Madam Speaker, enough is enough. It's time for every Territorian, whether they live in Darwin, Katherine, Alice Springs, Tennant Creek, and our remote regions to stand up and say to federal Labor, we will no longer accept this kind of neglect. This budget has failed the Northern Territory comprehensively. It has failed our economy, failed our future, which then fails the people of the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, it is a disgrace. It's shameful and we must not allow it to continue. I urge all Territorians today, hold Labor to account. Demand better, demand fairness, and demand a government that actually recognises the value of the Northern Territory to the rest of Australia. Madam Speaker, our people in the Northern Territory are resilient, they're strong, and they are incredibly capable. Investing in the Territory isn't just about supporting our region, it's about strengthening and supporting the entire nation. We have that capability, Madam Speaker. We have that capacity. We can do that for the rest of the country from here in the Northern Territory. And every dollar spent here contributes directly to a stronger, more secure and more prosperous nation. Canberra had the opportunity to act on this wisdom, but instead they chose neglect. But we cannot keep doing more with less. We cannot continue being forgotten by federal Labor. Madam Speaker, this budget must be a wake-up call. Canberra must recognise our worth, fund our future properly and treat Territorians with the respect that we deserve. Madam Speaker, we will continue to fight because our territory is worth it, our people are worth it. And it's about time Canberra understood that as well, Madam Speaker. We see the development opportunities available here in the Territory, in our infrastructure corridors, our infrastructure hubs, and of course in Middle Arm. And last night, Madam Speaker, rather than federal Labor taking money that they have tucked away in equity and hidden in Infrastructure Australia, which is not actual cash, it just sits on their books. They never removed any of that money out of equity, even though we've been asking for it to be moved to cash, so we can start to deliver on these all-important projects for the Northern Territory. Just last week, we heard the Darwin Major Business Group present its report into the future of the Northern Territory. And that future was very, very clear, Madam Speaker. It said for the Territory to grow and dig itself out of the financial mess that the previous Labor government placed us in, we need to drive private investment in the Northern Territory. And to drive that private investment, Madam Speaker, we need the government to invest in the infrastructure corridors and our infrastructure hubs so that private investment can commence and take place. Private investment and the private sector will drive the Territory's growth and drive the Territory's economy. But what did we get last night from federal Labor, Madam Speaker? Not $1 of that equity money sitting in Infrastructure Australia was released to start driving these projects to drive the Territory out of the economic issues that we face that are inherited from the previous government. It's an absolute shame, Madam Speaker, that the federal government doesn't understand this. We've been passing this message on for many, many months now, and they still have not listened. But I said, Canberra need to listen to us today. Territorians need to stand up and say that we won't take this anymore. We need the federal government to support us here in the Territory and drive our growth. Maintenance money from the federal government is no longer enough, Madam Speaker. We need that direct investment into our infrastructure so that we can grow the Territory, so we can make this place what it can be. We can make the Northern Territory the economic powerhouse of Australia. We have the capacity and the capability, Madam Speaker, to be the next Western Australia. We have the resources, the minerals and the gas to be able to drive our economy forwards and be a powerhouse in the economic development of Australia. But we need that hand up from the federal government. I'm not asking for a hand out, Madam Speaker, I'm asking for a hand up. I need the federal government to commit on their promises to take that money out of equity, move it over into cash so we can start delivering on these infrastructure projects that will drive our economy forward, which will improve our private sector investment, which will create jobs for the Territory, which will create economic wealth and benefit for all Territorians. I thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to bring this statement to the House this morning, and I move that the report be noted.
The question is that the report be noted. Those of that opinion say aye. Sorry, the Leader of the Opposition. I thought, yeah. Please, Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Speak.
I know we're all still making sure that we've got the script right, so we know when to jump and when not to. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it's quite laughable, actually, that we see the Treasurer, Bill Yan, for the CLP government, standing in this chamber and attacking a budget that delivers more tax cuts, more power bill cuts and more affordable healthcare to every Territorian who will benefit, Madam Speaker. And I think it is quite well, I understand why the Treasurer is doing it, obviously trying to build himself up for the federal election to say, oh, look what we've done in the Territory to try and help our mates get in. But in terms of actually telling the story to Territorians, I think it is quite laughable, Madam Speaker. Imagine playing politics, Madam Speaker, which we've just seen the Treasurer do, with a budget that has delivered more for the Territory when it comes to the cost of living relief. More money into education, more money into our Territory hospitals, and more money into our roads, more money into our police, and, Madam Speaker, always the icing and the cherry on top of the cake, extra GST. This is a windfall for the Territory, which now the Treasurer and the CLP government will get to play with. Let's hope they play with it in the right way, Madam Speaker. All up, the Albanese Labor government will invest more than $7.2 billion into the Northern Territory this financial year alone. And the Treasurer will have you pick, they're really good at this, Madam Speaker, we've seen, pick all the bits of data they want to tell the parts of their own narrative and their own story, but not actually tell the whole story. And that is being disingenuous to Territorians, Madam Speaker. $7.2 billion for the Northern Territory. Or let's use the Deputy Chief Minister's language, Madam Speaker. That's more than $7,000 million. So, Madam Speaker, has the Treasurer actually read the money that's coming in and those budget lines? I know it was just released last night. Has he done his extra homework? Has he stayed up late at night like we would have seen previous Treasurers underlining, scoring, highlighting all of the income that the Territory will receive and much needed income? Has he done his homework? Has he had that late night doing his job and what he's paid for in the Territory? How is it that the Treasurer can now stand in this chamber and talk about the good news of the Territory budget, which they will get to capitalise? It's not a Labor government anymore in the NT, it is indeed a CLP government, that the Treasurer will get to capitalise with his team with this incredibly good news for the Northern Territory. But all I can describe it, Madam Speaker, is a bit of a professional tantrum, and I don't think I've seen such an unwarranted piece of grandstanding in this place by a Treasurer ever. So, Madam Speaker, it seems that the CLP is really stuck in opposition mode, despite being 7 months into being government. And all they know how to do is attack and whinge, and they cannot, for the life of anybody in the Territory, they cannot talk about the good stories of the Territory, the good programs, the good investment when it comes, Madam Speaker. It's like it's something that can't come out of their mouths when we're talking about telling the whole story. And this is a very strange strategy from the Treasurer. Perhaps he's got some political leadership aspirations. Keeps going back to the Darwin port. And I'm not sure if the Treasurer did his homework, but before he was in Parliament, Madam Speaker, the Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, was part of the CLP government who sold the Darwin port. And it just blows my mind, Madam Speaker, that the Treasurer keeps trying to distance himself, and awkwardly we see the Chief Minister standing in press conferences when the Treasurer goes for the Darwin port conversation going, oh, actually I was part of the team that was the ones who sold the port, and standing awkwardly back. It is such a very strange tactic, or maybe the Treasurer doesn't even know. He's actually putting his leader in it. He's actually putting his leader in it by pointing out the Darwin port story, which was sold under the CLP government. He either doesn't do his homework, he doesn't know, he doesn't care. It's very bizarre. So, Madam Speaker, another important part of the territory, which many people know and love, is Kakadu. And the Treasurer mentioned this in his speech, and I think it is a very important part of the Northern Territory story. I was very honoured and fortunate to... Sorry, that's my nephew over there. I was very fortunate to be able to represent Kakadu National Park and Jabiru Township for 4 years when I became the member for Arnhem in my first term. It is a beautiful part of the territory, but it had a lot of complexities attached, and I continued to learn over the 4 years about Kakadu. Oh, wait for this one, Member for Blaine. So, Madam Speaker, on the 13th of January 2019, there was $216.2 million announced for Kakadu, and that was under then Coalition Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Aboriginal Affairs Minister for the Nation, Senator Nigel Scullion, and standing in the photo and standing in the press releases and the video was the failed CLP candidate for Lingiari, Jacinta Price. And the work of getting that federal money for the 3 years, because just remember, in 2019, we saw a federal government retained by the coalition. So Scott Morrison stayed a Prime Minister. I think he called it a miracle himself. And for 3 more years under the coalition government, we did not have that money rolled out here in the territory for Kakadu National Park and the work around Jabiru. So that was in 2019. But interestingly, Madam Speaker, and again, I know it's before some of the time of many of the people in this House, it was actually before my time in this House, the then Treasurer of the, the then Minister for Lands and Planning, he did hold the Treasury portfolio as well, David Tollner, wrote to Senator Nigel Scullion on the 8th of December 2015, and basically, this is a 2-page letter, and I'm very happy I'm going to table it too, Madam Speaker, wrote off the township of Jabiru, a Northern Territory town, wrote it off to say, here, federal government, we will hand it back. Jabiru is too hard and too complex for us to do our job as the Northern Territory government, the then CLP government. Here, take it back, and I will quote, Madam Speaker, and I will table this after I quote it. Quote, at the very last paragraph, the letter from David Tollner to the Senator for the Northern Territory, Nigel Scullion, who was the Federal Indigenous Affairs Minister at the time, and I'll quote, Madam Speaker, directly from the letter. Accordingly, and recognising that both the grant of Jabiru and as Aboriginal land and the mining future of the Ranger Project area are Commonwealth decisions, the Territory has decided to discontinue any negotiations for the future tenure arrangements in the town, full stop. And Madam Speaker, I seek leave to table this letter for reference. Thank you.
Is leave granted? Aye. Leave is granted.
Come on, you want to see the letter that Dave Tollner said, giving up Jabiru. So all Territorians will now have that record. It's hopefully more public knowledge. But another interesting thing, and I thought it was maybe a ill-thought-out strategy, maybe quite a clever strategy from the Treasurer. Thank you. That Chief Minister 𝘰𝘓𝘂𝘧𝘠 𝘠𝘰𝘯 was part of the CLP government who decided to hand back Jabiru to the Commonwealth government because it was in the too hard basket. When the Chief Minister first entered Parliament in 2012, she was a part of the government in that time frame. In 2015, the CLP government who handed back Jabiru, well, thankfully it didn't go through, but decided to hand back Jabiru to the Commonwealth government. The letter is there, it'll be publicly available for all to see. Chief Minister 𝘰𝘓𝘂𝘧𝘠 was part of the government who wanted to wipe their hands clean of doing any hard work for Jabiru. So I thought it was a very, very interesting strategy and tactic by the Treasurer to mention Kakadu and Jabiru. Luckily, I did my job as a local member, Madam Speaker, for the 4 years, and I know all of that history, but many in this place probably do not. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to share that with the House, and particularly the CLP government, Madam Speaker. Every day it is becoming increasingly clear that CLP government has absolutely no positive agenda or economic vision for the Northern Territory. Just a whinging, whining, punitive gimme and what we know is better than you mentality. Maybe the Treasurer should spend less time fishing and enjoying the hospitality of the Northern Territory rather than spending time actually sitting down with the federal government so he can understand what's going on, because I am sure, Madam Speaker, that the federal Labor government would be happy to sit down and walk him through and teach him how to be a treasurer. But that's okay, because the Albanese Labor government has already managed to deliver for the Territory without the Territory's treasurer. $7.2 billion worth of delivering to the Territory, Madam Speaker. And Territorians want to see a government, whether it's federal, whether it's local, whether it's the Territory government, in fact, actually behave like adults and forge strong partnerships in Canberra. A government that is actually interested in the best interests of Territorians and has them at their heart of decision-making. A government that can rise above the petty politics, which we haven't seen yet in 7 months, to eventually engage and be mature when it comes to those decisions and the lobbying and the advocacy that we expect all Territory governments, regardless of politics, to lobby the federal counterparts to deliver and to invest in the Territory. Madam Speaker, a government is expected by Territorians to actually take the time to listen and consult with Territorians before barging through what is overly simplistic laws and ignoring evidence-based laws and policies, ignoring experts, in fact, and those with real-world experience. What we see, Madam Speaker, is small-mindedness around policy and laws and approaches and so-called consultation. One-note government that has absolutely no idea and no vision, Madam Speaker. The Treasurer, 𝘩𝘢𝘢𝘐𝑺, is the bill that the Territory can simply not afford. Madam Speaker, the good news, though, for Territorians is that the federal Labor Albanese government isn't waiting for the CLP to catch up. They are getting on with delivering and delivering in spades. We know that the federal government understands that Territorians want and deserve and need a strong government. So they've gone through and done it at the federal level. The investment of cost and living relief, investment in critical services, investment in infrastructure, investment that will grow the Territory economy. For nearly a decade, Madam Speaker, we suffered under the previous federal Liberal coalition government, and Peter Dutton was a part of that government. And he ripped away billions of dollars from the Territory. Billions of dollars, Madam Speaker. In fact, some of those cuts are still being felt deeply in the wounds of the Territory today. And, Madam Speaker, you will not hear that from the Treasurer. No, because they pick and choose the stories that they want to say that suits their own narrative, rather than being genuine and tell Territorians the full story. And at the time, Madam Speaker, we can go back to time frames, while the federal Liberal counterparts were robbing the Territory blind, Chief Minister 𝘰𝘢𝘢𝘀𝑉𝑒𝑎𝑛𝑛𝑜 stood by and said nothing. Said nothing. There is nothing we can find quoting 𝘰𝘢𝘢𝘀𝑉𝑒𝑎𝑛𝑛𝑜, the now Chief Minister, who stood by and saw the federal Liberal coalition rip money away from the Territory. We can't even quote her in saying this is not a good thing or we're not happy. We can't find a single thing, Madam Speaker. What this budget shows, the federal budget shows, is that the Territory is always better off under a federal Labor government. Actually, they understand us and they get us. So, yes, we get frustrations with decisions that are made in Canberra about us and not with us, but that's the job of the Territory government, to fight for the Territory. That's the job that we all do in our different roles in this place, Madam Speaker. And what we want to make sure is that we have a future Prime Minister that will care about the Territory, that will care about Territorians, and Peter Dutton is definitely not that person, Madam Speaker, and neither are the Liberal cronies at his side. We do not want to see the cuts that Peter Dutton has already said that he will impose on Australians. He's said it openly, Madam Speaker. So just think, if the cuts are going to hurt other parts of the country, those big populations on the East Coast especially, imagine the pain we are going to feel here in the Northern Territory. We know that if Peter Dutton was fortunate enough to become the Prime Minister, he would likely rip GST away from the Northern Territory, just like the previous federal Liberal governments have done, Madam Speaker. And he was part of that team, so he has a good memory, I'm sure, and I'm sure that we as Territorians continue to hold that in our memory. Madam Speaker, let's break down some of that $7.2 billion so that Territorians can understand, because they're not going to hear it from the Treasurer, disingenuous about the dollars and the figures and where they're going and how they've been coming in, so that Territorians can understand the good deal that we're getting under the Albanese Labor government. Public schools, $736.7 million to enhance education infrastructure and resources by fully funding schools. Healthcare and hospitals, $600 million to improve healthcare services and facilities right across the Territory. We had a matter of public importance just yesterday, Madam Speaker, about the health infrastructure and lack of planning that we've seen so far from the new government. This will indeed help them get their skates on, let's hope, to actually plan. Defence investment, tens of billions of dollars over the next decade, Madam Speaker, to support local defence industry and to create jobs here in the Territory. $2.8 billion over the next 10 years to upgrade and seal the region's road network for our Territory roads. Remote housing, $840 million to address housing shortages and improve living conditions. Remote policing, $200 million to enhance community safety and policing services. An extra GST funding, Madam Speaker, of $4.6 billion to support the Territory's economic development. That is a windfall. If you were playing government lotto, Madam Speaker, the GST is the lotto windfall. It is the jackpot. And now the Treasurer, who has said nothing about the GST windfall in his contribution, speech, report, whatever you want to call it, has said nothing about the GST that will be coming in under now a CLP government. How are they going to spend the money? What are they going to do? We'll find out in May, of course, Madam Speaker, but you wouldn't even think there was an increase to the GST with the lack of talk by the Treasurer about this. He could have claimed it as his good work and, whatever, we would have celebrated as long as we get the GST. That's all we're worried about over here on this side, Madam Speaker, but has completely missed the opportunity to capitalise for himself and his team in acknowledging that great windfall, and we will see the increase in the GST for the Northern Territory, which the former Labor government was fighting for year on year on year since that horrible $500 million cut to GST we experienced just years ago. And I know you understand the dollars, Madam Speaker, because you have been a Treasurer of the Northern Territory. And it is a hard job, I understand. It is a hard job. But when there are good things happening, Madam Speaker, we all want to hear about it. We all want to hear about those jobs that will be created because of economic investment. We want to hear about how infrastructure is going to be improved for our everyday lives and for safe access on roads and for our hospitals, for our service deliveries, Madam Speaker. Cost of living relief. Federal Labor is directly addressing the cost of living pressures. Every taxpayer will receive new tax cut up to $268 in 26-27 budget and financial year, and up to $536, Madam Speaker, in the 27-28 financial year. This is combined with Labor's first round of tax cuts. The average benefit of NT taxpayers will be $2,713 in that next financial year of 27-28. All 88,000 households in the Northern Territory will get an extra $150 to help with their energy bills, Madam Speaker. We know every dollar counts, along with 11,000 eligible small businesses in the Northern Territory. The government's energy bill relief plans to the Northern Territory in 25-26 financial year are estimated at a total of $14.9 million for the Territory. Over 5 million Australians will save from the 1st of January 2026 from the government's reduction of the maximum general co-payment of $25. Madam Speaker, what this means in real terms is will result in an expected 40,000 cheaper prescriptions that are expected to be dispensed over an average of each year in the Northern Territory, saving more than $1.3 million. 18,000 people in the higher education loans program debt, so they call it HELP, used to be HEX, most people remember, in the Northern Territory will save an estimated $81.9 million from their outstanding loans for higher education, and that's a Northern Territory reduction on average for each student of $4,573 to pay off that higher education loan, Madam Speaker. Health investment. The CLP claims negative and nonsense. Well, we're talking about the investment in bulk billing estimated to result in an additional 168,000 bulk bill GP visits each year in the Northern Territory and 80 general practices moving to bulk billing, so all patients and residents in the Territory will look at savings. We're thinking we've got the numbers between $444 and $677 per year for Territorians. And the extension, Madam Speaker, of the federal government's National Health Reform Agreement will see the Northern Territory receive an additional $51 million. Great news for the member for Berkeley as the Health Minister from the Commonwealth, for a total federal funding contribution of $600 million in health for the Northern Territory, 30% increase compared to the 24-25 budget. So if you can't do your jobs with that extra money, Madam Speaker, I don't know what the priorities are of the CLP government. We're yet to hear. They keep saying wait till May. We will wait. We definitely won't hold our breath.
Member for Nelson.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition spoke about the $5 tax cut starting next year, 26. Madam Speaker, that's we're only in the third month of this year. That's a lot of time between now and then, Madam Speaker, for the cost of living crisis that this Labor government have afforded upon Territorians. Let me start by saying the federal budget was an absolute flop. The federal government has clearly forgotten about the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, it's not hard to find us. If you look at a map of Australia, we're the giant chunk of land sitting right at the top in the middle. Our border is South Australia, and we go right up to the Arafura Sea. We're a 1.42 million square kilometre landmass, Madam Speaker. We have the highest population of Indigenous people per capita in the country. We have gas reserves that could power the country. We should be a priority. Our Treasurer, 𝘭𝘢𝘐𝑺, has already been out speaking publicly about his take on the budget, and we just heard from his formal response here in the chamber. And he's right to criticise the federal budget, Madam Speaker. The only new money announced for the Territory in this budget is a $200 million payment out of a $786 billion budget, which is conditionable. $200 million out of a budget of $786 billion. I'll let that sink in, Madam Speaker. $200 million extra out of a budget of $786 billion. Madam Speaker, I also heard the veiled threats from Senator Marie-Clare McCarthy on ABC radio this morning. She basically said, if we're not grateful, we might lose federal funding. This is what she said, Madam Speaker. I'd be very careful in the terms of criticism that is coming towards the federal budget on this. They still have yet to provide their first budget. We do inject significant funding into the Northern Territory as a whole. So I wonder what that really means, Madam Speaker. I wonder if she's happy to leave Territorians out to dry and look after her mates in Canberra and on the eastern seaboard. We're yet to find out. It's shameful, Madam Speaker. Do those opposite in the Labor Party support that position? We're yet to hear. We will never apologise for fighting for Territorians. As my colleague, the Treasurer, has already mentioned, the Territory has been forgotten about. Who is fighting for us, really, Madam Speaker? People on this side of the chamber certainly are. The people on that side, we're not sure about. And we certainly know their party's not, because they've forgotten about us. We all know there will be structural gas shortfalls on the East Coast by 27-28, to which Beetaloo is Australia's biggest onshore gas reserve, which could provide a solution to that. The East Coast needs cheap and abundant gas rapidly to avoid large-scale blackouts, but without Beetaloo investment, the Territory cannot deliver. We need infrastructure investment. We need airports and runway upgrades, Catherine Bridge upgrades, underwriting of pipeline infrastructure to be able to deliver gas to Australians, Territory gas, that is, Madam Speaker, to the rest of the country. Cheap Australian gas fuels a competitive manufacturing industry that North Australia lacks and was the core for the Middle Arm development. Madam Speaker, gas provides jobs, which will provide population growth in the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, and we all know what I've said about that. The more population we have, the more people, the more indirect jobs in the Northern Territory, such as the mechanics, the hairdressers, the truck drivers. Such infrastructure projects can provide critical regional and remote employment for Territorians and drive the expansion and upskilling of our local workforce. That's right, Madam Speaker, upskilling of our local workforce. Meaningful jobs, well-paid meaningful jobs for Territorians. Madam Speaker, we all know that the royalties and the income from onshore gas comes into our budget, so we don't have to rely upon the federal budget. And we all know, Madam Speaker, that we use taxpayers' money, no matter where it comes from in Australia, to pay for the health system, to pay for the education system, to pay for the police, to keep us safe. Madam Speaker, we just heard from nearly 1,000 delegates right here in Darwin for the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association's biggest beast conference this year. What we did hear loud and clear is that our cattlemen and women and our cattle industry is the heartbeat of our bush, driving jobs, sustaining families and keeping the Territory thriving. Madam Speaker, we need to support this billion-dollar industry, keep it thriving as they continue to provide jobs and economic stability for NT. Jobs for regional, jobs for town people, jobs right across the Northern Territory. We're talking about those direct and indirect jobs, Madam Speaker. This government, the CLP government, understands this, but sadly it doesn't seem that our federal counterparts recognise the crucial role that our cattle industry plays in the Northern Territory economy. We saw last night the budget handed down, and what did we see? What did the Northern Territory see? Nothing but this $200 million out of the $786 billion, which is conditional upon that we've got to chip money in, Madam Speaker, and we know the budget is completely cooked by the previous 8 years of the Labor government. The Treasurer spoke about a $5 billion program and only allocating $313 odd million to pay for that. So the cash payment, they knew they can't deliver it. They did that in a way to sneak the budget through in an election year. Again, Madam Speaker, $5 billion worth of programs and only $300 odd million to pay for it. So that's going to be programs that have been programmed to commence in the Northern Territory, but simply cannot be funded because the Labor government, the previous Labor government, failed to plan ahead and have money in the budget ready for these programs that they've started. Madam Speaker, we've heard loud and clear that our cattle industry needs roads. The roads need to be a priority. We understand that time is weight and weight is money, and taking the long way around is just not good enough. Our roads are a mess, left to decay over 8 years of no money being prioritised to upgrade these vital pieces of infrastructure. Madam Speaker, not to mention the animal welfare, where these trucks drive across roads which are broken down and dangerous, and these cows getting vibrated around, the dust, in the worst extremes, trucks rolling, Madam Speaker. How can we expect our cattle industry to get to the port for the live export to Indonesia when our road trains are struggling just to safely travel from property onto the roads, up the highway to the port? How can Central Australian producers move their cattle off property when the roads are simply unsafe to travel on? Live exports are the lifeblood of our economy and a crucial part of our trade with Asia. And we do take that seriously, Madam Speaker, because we've introduced a Minister for Asian and Trade Relations who's been overseas promoting the Territory, promoting our livestock and promoting a better relationship with our partners to the north. We must protect and expand these markets, and I will do everything in my power to ensure the live export remains strong and moves forward in the Northern Territory. We have heard the Sandover Highway is a mess. The 𝘠𝘦𝘳𝘳 is a liability. It's been getting done bit by bit, but those roads in the Central Australia, and Madam Speaker, we've heard time and time again the member of the Bark League tell us about the roads. I've spoken to people who live in that area. I've driven down some of those roads and they are disgraceful. Madam Speaker, I think I've told the story where I was on the Stewart Highway about 40 k's south of Tennant Creek. Literally, it was a gravel road time I was there, and a car was driving up, hit a pothole and broke down in front of me. I stopped to take some photos of how bad the road was, and there was a breakdown literally right in front of where I was because of the condition of the Stewart Highway. Our roads connect our trucks to the mines, our mines to the ports, and it's crucially important that we need to make sure that our roads are a priority. The appalling Labor government, instead of handing down a responsible budget for the Northern Territory, they focused solely on trying to get re-elected. Shame on them. I briefly touched on the port, Madam Speaker. Again, the member for Solomon has been speaking about the importance of the port for the last few weeks. Why? No money, no focus. Our crucial port, our gateway to Asia, has again been ignored. Billions of dollars have been promised for other parts of regional Australia, yet the Northern Territory got mere maintenance money. Madam Speaker, it seems that the federal government has forgotten about us, and it's clear that those opposite refuse to fight for Territorians. Madam Speaker, there are just some of many things in the budget, but let me give you an example of some of the things that
Minister,
the federal
your
Labor...
time has expired. Honourable members, we have some special guests in the gallery this morning. We've got students from the Holy Spirit Catholic Primary School, Year 5 and 6, and we welcome you and hope you enjoy your time in Parliament House this morning. Any more speakers? Member for Berkeley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise to speak in support of the ministerial report this morning by the Treasurer. Certainly the federal budget handed down overnight is clearly a slap in the face for Territorians. We know that there's many issues right across the Northern Territory, and I'll pick up on the member for Nelson, and I'll just quickly touch on roads before I move to talk about some of the issues with the lack of investment in health here in the Northern Territory from the federal government. But Madam Speaker, roads, to see $200 million in the budget for part of the Stewart Highway. We do know that the Stewart Highway, the Berkeley Highway in my electorate, the Victoria Highway, but roads right across the Berkeley, Madam Speaker, many of which are unsealed roads, require significant investment from the federal government. We do know that, particularly the Tablelands Highway, the Berkeley Highway, the Sandover Highway, the Murray Downs Road, all of those roads require significant investment. I do want to mention that there is over $160 million going into investment in the Carpentaria Highway, but that money was put forward by the Coalition around about 3 years ago. So I do want to commend the Coalition who invested that money just prior to the previous election in May 2022. So that investment is going ahead on the Carpentaria Highway, and it's I think it's roughly about 90 kilometres of bitumen that now has been laid. But Madam Speaker, when we talk about roads, our roads are of strategic importance and really can unlock economic opportunities. It improves safety, but it also ensures efficient transport of goods and services here in the Northern Territory. The member for Nelson spoke about the cattle industry. Pastoralists constantly transporting cattle, and just the condition of the Tablelands Highway is absolutely atrocious. I do know the Sandover Highway is that cattle producers are actually taking a long way around. They can't get across the Sandover into Queensland because of the lack of investment in our roads. But it's the importance of getting the roads right is we face in the Northern Territory challenges of frequent natural disasters, extreme weather events, and federal investment is really needed to ensure that there's a focus on resilience and capacity building initiatives to prepare and mitigate for these important weather events that often impact on roads, but also puts lives and property at risk all of the time through these weather events. So it's very disappointing to see that very little investment when it comes to roads and building up that resilience that we need to be able to keep roads open. We did see, I think, last year and the year before, significant weather events which closed the Stuart Highway in a couple of areas. So the lack of investment in the main arterial road here in the Northern Territory is really noticeable. So there needs to be more investment in the Stuart Highway, the Barkly Highway, the Victoria Highway, but significant investment in key roads in my electorate in the Barkly. So very disappointing to see the lack of investment there. But Madam Speaker, also in the Barkly, I just want to remind people that the Barkly regional deal was signed on the 13th of April back in 2019. So we're talking nearly 5 years ago. When I talk about roads and weather events, one of the critical pieces of infrastructure that still hasn't been delivered, and I'd have to go back to the federal budget just to see if there is any investment. If there is, it must be hidden away in a line item somewhere. But 17.8 million, I think, was earmarked to deliver a weather radar in the Barkly 5 years ago, and that still hasn't been delivered by the federal government. So this is of critical concern to not only pastoralists but to our emergency services, Aboriginal people living in remote areas, people living in remote areas, business people. This weather radar is a critical piece of infrastructure that must be delivered in Tennant Creek. It's a critical piece of infrastructure. It gives the ability to people to check the radar before they leave Tennant Creek. It impacts on the ability for contractors to get out to various places to deliver services. So that piece of infrastructure, I do urge the federal government to ensure that that investment is still going ahead. But when it comes to health, Madam Speaker, it is important that I remind people that the Northern Territory is the most underfunded part of Australia when it comes to delivering health services. And if we go back to a National Cabinet decision back on the 6th of December 23, the federal government indicated that through the Commonwealth contribution rate that every state and territory would eventually get to a 42.5% of the Commonwealth funding pool. But at the moment, we are significantly behind. We're the lowest in Australia, and in fact we only receive 31.8% of the Commonwealth contribution rate for overall funding. So this makes it extremely difficult to deliver services when it comes to health. One of the things that I do briefly want to talk about is not only the fact that we're significantly underfunded, but the inequity that we face when it comes to Commonwealth funding. For example, Madam Speaker, in Australia, the Commonwealth provide funding for aeromedical retrieval services across other jurisdictions, including Central Australia. However, they don't provide any funding for aeromedical services in the top end where we are speaking today. So basically, from Elliott upwards, the Northern Territory government is funding aeromedical retrieval services, and at the moment, approximately around about 40 million per annum is paid to Careflight to deliver this service here in the Northern Territory. But I do have a map in front of me, and it just shows that all of those retrieval services are funded everywhere across the nation, except for this small portion in the top end, Madam Speaker. So that's just one example of where the Northern Territory is paying for a service that is funded by the Commonwealth in every part of Australia, except for the top end here in the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, it was disappointing to see that, and I spoke yesterday about this, that the Northern Territory has been working diligently with the federal government to try and trying to get an investment of $120 million to invest in aged care here in the Northern Territory. It's disappointing. I'm hoping that negotiations can continue, and I hope they are continuing, but there's no line item in the budget to indicate that there's $120 million to deliver an aged care facility here in the Northern Territory. So that, from a health perspective, we are still seeing 60 to 80 aged care patients taking up beds in the hospital and being cared for by health services here in the Northern Territory. So it is very disappointing to see that that $120 million hasn't featured in the budget. Yesterday I did mention that the Labor federal government promised back in 26th of April 2022 to deliver 500 new First Nations medical trainees, 30 new renal clinics, and they said that they would double the funding for rheumatic heart disease. Now, Territorians have been waiting nearly 3 years for that funding to be delivered. So, as I said yesterday, it's difficult to have any trust in our federal politicians here in the Northern Territory. We've got the member for 𝘰𝘢𝘷𝘦, we've got Malindari McCarthy as the Senator, Luke Gosling the member for Solomon. No investment in aged care, a promise made nearly 3 years ago to double funding for rheumatic heart disease and invest in 30 renal clinics here in the Northern Territory. Renal disease here in the Northern Territory has reached crisis point. That's the situation that we face here in the Northern Territory. All of these empty promises by the federal government to try and deliver additional services and funding and infrastructure to tackle some of the serious health problems that we face have been completely ignored by the federal government in this budget. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers? The question is that the report be...
Sorry, Madam Speaker.
Oh, member for Breitling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise today to speak to this ministerial report handed down by the Treasurer today. Madam Speaker, when a lot of people woke up this morning and woke to see the federal budget, they will see $17 billion in tax cuts. But what that really means, Madam Speaker, to most Territorians is 70 cents a day returned to their pocket. This, whilst Northern Territory, as we move towards $11 billion worth of debt, Madam Speaker, much of that accrued under the previous Labor government. $7.1 billion, as the Leader of the Opposition stated, will be provided to the Northern Territory from the federal government as part of this budget. But let's be very clear here, Madam Speaker. That $7.1 billion from the feds to the NT, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But over in Queensland, in January of this year, $7.2 billion was put aside for the Bruce Highway. That's one highway in Queensland getting as much money committed to it as the entire Northern Territory is getting committed to it in this next financial year. One highway compared to the entire Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, and that's why we always talk about equity and about fighting for our fair share here in the Northern Territory. It doesn't seem like the federal government are ensuring that the Northern Territory is, as the Treasurer has put it, is given a hand up to get us all out of the mess the former Labor government have put us into. You could literally wipe the Territory debt, giving us the ability to invest in key priorities, ensure Territory and the Northern Territory can deliver for our country in regards to economic development with that $17 billion that the federal government are going to be spending, giving people that 70 cents per day, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, defence is one of our key priorities, and for our country, the NT needs to have investment to ensure the stability of our region and security of the country. Madam Speaker, unless the federal government are worried about penguins invading from Antarctica, our defence capabilities need to be in the north. They need to be up here in Northern Australia, Madam Speaker. An increased focus on basing troops and strategic defence infrastructure in the north will need to be implemented to properly defend our nation in a time of unrest. Recent announcements of troops being redeployed to South Australia might look good on paper, Madam Speaker. However, to redeploy to the NT would see a much more immediate response should it be required. Infrastructure investment is another key priority for the Northern Territory. Our roads, and many members have spoken about this morning, Madam Speaker, both the Deputy Leader, the Member for Berkeley and the Treasurer have all spoken about how important roads are and how our roads here in the Northern Territory, especially the Stuart Highway, have been left to deteriorate in recent times and recent years. I remember almost losing the Deputy Chief Minister in a pothole near Tennant Creek, and I note that he's also spoken this morning about the state of that road, Madam Speaker. The critical piece of infrastructure is so important to ensure the transportation of goods and people up and down our federally recognised highway, and I again point to the fact that there's been a $7.2 billion commitment to the Bruce Highway, a 1,600-kilometre stretch of highway in Queensland, yet here in the Northern Territory we still see our national highway go underwater, washed away during years. Madam Speaker, in my hometown of Alice Springs, we have once again been dudded. The federal member for Lingiari, Marion Scrimgeour, promised the town of Alice Springs and sporting fans a grandstand at the CDU Oval in 2021. Yet years later, we are now facing a federal election commitment, which is nothing more than another empty promise from the feds, whilst Alice Springs is missing out again. There was $250 million as part of a support package that the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was forced to make during our crime crisis of Labor's making in Alice Springs. It has delivered very little for our town, Madam Speaker, and our government is now being told during briefings that the money is fully committed. Fully committed to what, I ask, Madam Speaker? During briefings, it looked like the member for 𝘠𝘠𝘅 has ended up with plenty of money for his electric being spent. Surprise, surprise. Whilst the town in the centre of the furrow has once again missed out, Madam Speaker. Remote communities in the member for 𝘠𝘠𝘅's electorates are getting millions spent on splash pads and BMX tracks, and I certainly don't hold that against them, Madam Speaker. But as we've said, the whole reason why that $250 million was promised as part of that was due to the increase in crime that we saw in Alice Springs. That is what led to the Prime Minister of Australia being brought to our town, and yet we are still waiting to see a lot of that money spent on the ground. I know also in Alice Springs we've certainly been waiting for our own splash pad for some time, Madam Speaker. 8 years under Labor we were yet to see that, and now it's up to our government to ensure that we can deliver on some of these promises, Madam Speaker, that have been promised for so long, yet never delivered. Don't even get me started, Madam Speaker, on the National Aboriginal Art Gallery. Madam Speaker, if the federal government wanted to support the Northern Territory, if they were serious about getting us out of the position their Labor mates have gotten us into, so we can better support Territorians, they need to put their hands in their pocket and ensure we are getting our fair, Madam Speaker, to ensure we can, as we keep saying here in this chamber, Madam Speaker, rebuild our great territory. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for 𝘠𝘠𝘅.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it is important to speak about this important initiative that's been rolled out last night. It is disappointing that the Treasurer has failed to follow parliamentary processes and afford members of the opposition and the crossbench the appropriate notice so that members of the opposition and the crossbench have an opportunity to prepare a response. But that is what you get under the CLP, is a government who doesn't follow processes, who doesn't give the appropriate notices. There are independent members of this Parliament who were not afforded the opportunity to prepare a response to the budget, and that is absolutely disgraceful that time and time again we see the arrogance of this government not affording the opposition and the independents the appropriate notice to come in here the morning of and make these changes without suspending standing orders, without following the appropriate processes, without giving the appropriate notice is absolutely laughable. We hear it from the Territory's Treasurer, the bill the Territory cannot afford, the bill who comes in here and out and makes false claims or statements about the federal budget. The federal budget has delivered significant investments into the Northern Territory. The federal government is giving the Territory additional money through GST revenue, but the Treasurer continues to talk the Territory down. That's all he's programmed to do, Madam Speaker, is to just continually talk the Territory down. The Commonwealth Government, in their budget last night, have invested in a range of areas. It is disappointing to hear the member for Breitling, who is supposed to be a proud Central Australian, using divisive language about remote Aboriginal Territorians and isolating them from Alice Springs. Our region thrives when the whole Central Australia thrives. So investing critical infrastructure into the region is absolutely important. Addressing critical infrastructure shortages that have been legacy issues for generations in the bush is an important step to addressing the disadvantage in regional and remote areas, and that's something that we should be working on investing. The Commonwealth continues to invest in remote housing, in critical road corridors and infrastructure, Madam Speaker. This will absolutely continue to have a positive impact on people living in the Northern Territory. We've seen additional money in the budget, the federal budget, for domestic and family violence. Hopefully that money will run out quicker than the Northern Territory government's commitment, which hasn't seen a single domestic and family violence group receive any of the funding that they were promised. Madam Speaker, we have continued to see initiatives such as the remote food security initiatives being rolled out in the budget that will absolutely address critical goods and services in remote communities, addressing some of the transportation and freight costs that have driven up those costs and made it harder for people living in remote regions. That is pastoralists who access those community stores, that is remote Aboriginal Territorians who live in those remote communities. Providing this initiative is absolutely incredibly important. The federal budget as well continues to invest in health, in education. Ensuring that every Territory school is fully funded is absolutely crucial and important, and these are investments that we will continue to see being rolled out across the Northern Territory. The CLP talk about playing politics. They are the ones playing politics. They have brought on discussion about the federal budget to try and make themselves look better and talk down the federal government, when they should be working with the federal government to ensure that the investments made last night in the Territory continue to roll out, and we can see those investments rolling out, Madam Speaker. We've seen investments again around investing in our national parks, critical infrastructure, the information, telecommunications improvements and corridors, absolutely crucial and important, Madam Speaker. We have continued to see that investment that will now roll out with the new signing of the Northern Territory's Remote Aboriginal Investment Strategy, that is the NT-RAY, that does continue to fund critical aspects here in the Northern Territory, elements around education, health, community safety, police. It does address those additional investments now in peacekeeping and justice initiatives as well. So these are welcomed investments in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. This is absolutely incredibly important. Money in the budget as well through the budget appropriation of the NT-RAY looks at investing in up to 12 community-controlled child and family centres across the Northern Territory. That is an important initiative. It's certainly something that we want to see continued investment on and into the future. As I've said, we'll continue to see those critical infrastructure investments, the rolling out and the continuation of housing initiatives in our towns, cities, regional and remote areas is incredibly important. That is investment that is welcomed. Any investment from the Commonwealth that comes to the Northern Territory, either directly to the Northern Territory government or through way of investment and stimulus, is good for business in the Northern Territory because it stimulates the economy, it provides businesses the opportunity to have access to a pipeline of work, and that grows. We've seen investments in supporting people's HECS debts, we've seen investments in supporting small business. They are important investments. There are obviously conversations and investments from the Commonwealth around tax cuts. These are, again, welcomed investment in the Territory because they will go in some way, shape or form to stimulate the growth of the Territory's economy. Again, it is disappointing that the Treasurer has not read some important literature in the Northern Territory, bringing Crocs in the cabinet, because if he had read that, he would remember that it was the CLP government that in fact chose to sell the port of Darwin. They are the government, the CLP, the party who sold the Darwin port, now trying to win votes by trying to look like they are the champions advocating for it to be in public hands, when they are the very party who chose to sell the port to a foreign national group to remove it from the hands of the Territory. So I think it is rather hypocritical for the Treasurer to be in here making those statements. The Territory Labor Party absolutely always supported the port remaining in the hands of the public. That is incredibly important. I still stand by that, Madam Speaker. And yes, I think that there is certainly work that can be done and should be done around that. But when we talk about it, let's remember it is the CLP that have a history of selling public assets. They sold TIO, which they wonder why insurance premiums go up and they have no control over it. They sold the Port of Darwin. We know that they were preparing to sell Power and Water and Jacana when they were doing the structural separations, because that's what they do. So, Madam Speaker, it is important to highlight that last night we saw the Federal Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, hand down his fourth budget. There are a whole range of investments in that budget that will directly go to impact and improve the living conditions and the cost of living right here in the Northern Territory. We've seen incentives and rebates to help people with the cost of living through discounts or incentives around power, again, education, around taxation, and around supporting business through a whole range of innovative grants and schemes which will stimulate the Territory's economy. So I really encourage the Northern Territory Government to work with the Commonwealth Government on rolling out those critical and important investments so that we can see growth in the Northern Territory. It is a welcomed investment. I thank Mullendeary McCarthy, Marion Scrimgeour and Luke Gosling. If the CLP want to talk about transport, let's look at their very own Senator Jacinta Price. She certainly knows a thing about airlines because she's on a plane every chance she can get to get out of the Territory rather than be here fighting for Territorians like Senator McCarthy, like Marion Scrimgeour and like Luke Gosling. They are here for the Territory. They always have been. They always will be here to put the Territory first, not themselves.
Member for 𝘠𝘠.
Madam Speaker, I rise to add my contribution on this important ministerial report this morning. Firstly, I'd like to begin by correcting some of the mistruths the member for 𝘠𝘠 said at the beginning of his spiel just then. I'd like it noted on the record that last night an email was sent to the opposition leader, to the opposition government whip, to the independents and the crossbench, stating that today we will have a 2025 federal budget by leave ministerial report. Now, Madam Speaker, I can't control the inner workings of the team on that side, but we fulfilled our obligation. This morning, they gave it by leave. We didn't have to suspend standing orders because his party, the opposition agreed by leave that we would be able to do this ministerial report. So if they don't communicate with the future opposition leader, I can't do anything about that, Madam Speaker. I do know we did send it also to the opposition leader email, which I'm hoping the member for 𝘠𝘠 has access to by the end of the year. But until then, Madam Speaker, I can't help if that his three colleagues don't talk to him. I can't change that fact, Madam Speaker. The other thing too I'd like to point out is that we have 3 federal members for the Northern Territory within the Labor Party, and it is incredibly disappointing to see the lack of investment in the Territory coming down from the Federals. We are an important strategic part of Australia. We have a significant per capita proportion of Indigenous Australians, and yet we're just not seeing that investment flow. It's very disappointing to see today, you know, they'll get up and say, we're playing politics. Well, Madam Speaker, when I'm in this chamber, I represent the people of 𝘬𝘢𝘷𝘦 and I represent Territorians. Now, Madam Speaker, the Country Liberal Party, the party I am proud to be of, that comes third. The people of 𝘬𝘢𝘷𝘦 come first, the Territory second, political parties come third. And it's incredibly disappointing to see on that side of the chamber, they're going to get up and they're going to defend their federal colleagues who aren't fighting for them, who aren't fighting for the Territory, and instead they're just going to say, oh no, it's magical. Madam Speaker, a $236, I believe that's the number, pay tax cut, that doesn't even come this financial year, which is $5 a week. It's not a cost of living savings measure that's going to make a difference in our remote communities, in the Territory. It's not going to change anything. $150 off a power bill, Madam Speaker. Now, I love my aircon, Madam Speaker. My partner loves putting all three on in the house. But my power bill, $150, doesn't scratch the surface to my power bill, Madam Speaker, and it doesn't change anything across the Territory. And if these are the cost of living measures that are coming down, they're completely out of touch with ordinary Australians and Territorians, and it's just not good enough. And I'd love to see more investment in the Territory. $200 million being announced for a road, which is an 80-20 split with the Territory, without consultation with the Territory. Madam Speaker, what about the Arnhem Highway? What about the Vic Highway? What about the Barkly Highway? What about any of our roads out to remote communities? When will the money flow to see the Territory thrive? When will the supporting infrastructure come down so that we are able to generate more own source revenue? Why isn't the federal government, if they're going to throw money away, almost the same amount of money that's coming to the Territory from the federal government is going on one highway in Queensland? Madam Speaker, they don't care about the Territory. They don't want to see us thrive, and it breaks my heart knowing that the Northern Territory has broadly been represented by Labor, with the seat of Linngari and the seat of Northern Territory prior to that, for decades under Warren Snowden, now under Marion Scrimgeour, and I've enjoyed seeing Marion. I actually have a lot of personal respect for her, and the 3 times I've seen her in the last 4 years, I've said hello. And Madam Speaker, I'd love to see more of them out and about and actually working hard for the Territory. And Madam Speaker, we all need to realise that we are Territorians first, political parties third or fourth on our list of priorities. And I'd love to see the member for 𝘠𝘢𝘳 get up and say, hey, you know what? We could have gotten more. You know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go ring Marion. I'm going to ring Millendaria. I'm going to ring Luke, and I'm going to say, hey, Luke, haven't seen you in 2 years, but can we have a chat about the budget? You know, that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see investment coming. I wouldn't even mind if they pork-bellied it a little bit. Our senator shows up to Parliament and fights hard for the Territory, but we do acknowledge she is in opposition.
Okay, silence.
We do acknowledge she is in opposition, and we have 3 people, including the Minister for Indigenous Australians, within the federal Parliament, who comes from the Northern Territory, who's meant to be a fierce advocate. Instead, she's threatening the Treasurer on the radio. Madam Speaker, I love the Territory, and I think everyone in this chamber should reflect on their love for this place, because it is a wonderful place, but we do need help from our friends in Canberra. And it'd be incredibly great if they could realise that we are an important strategic part of the future of this country. We are the gateway to Asia. We are the solution to our gas problems in the country. We want to keep the lights on around Australia. We want to work with them. I really don't have a lot of love for Canberra as a city in its own self. It is far too cold and too roundabouty for my likings. But, Madam Speaker, there are lots of good people down there in the other Territory, and I'd love if they acknowledged our presence up here. Madam Speaker, not that it's particularly relevant, so please bear with me, but I discovered that people in the ACT also call themselves Territorians the other day, and it shocked me. Now, Madam Speaker, but it feels weird. But, Madam Speaker, I just want to reiterate once again that the budget was passed, I believe it was about 7 o'clock our time, which is after the 6 p.m. deadline for us to lodge a ministerial report the normal way. And, Madam Speaker, it was communicated last night to the opposition leader, to the opposition whip, to the independents and crossbench, including yourself, Madam Speaker, that we would do a ministerial report by leave, and that leave was granted. We did not need to suspend standing orders. So the first half of the member for 𝘠𝘢𝘳's speech is a complete fabrication, and unfortunately, it's disappointing to see that amongst the 4 of them, they can't even communicate. But Member for 𝘠𝘢𝘳, when you have access to the opposition leader email at the end of the year, you'll be getting these emails. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise today to speak on the federal budget, which sadly has left Territorians feeling disrespected, neglected and, of course, let down. The federal government has failed to deliver a fair share of resources to our region. This leaves us questioning whether we are truly part of this nation or merely an afterthought in the eyes of Canberra. The Chief Minister clearly outlined where we needed monetary support here in the Northern Territory. And what did they give us, Madam Speaker? A measly $200 million for a road. This is an insult to the people of the Northern Territory, and that's out of $786 billion. All we got was the $200 million. Yes, we need more funding for our roads, such as the Stewart, the Barkly and Victoria highways, which are lifelines for industry, for tourism, for remote communities. But we are so much more than roads, Madam Speaker. The Northern Territory is such a valuable asset to not only our region, but the whole of Australia when it comes to our national security. And we need more support in this space to continue strengthening our capabilities and economic growth. We have the potential to be a powerhouse in the gas industry, which is not only a critical contributor to our economy, but is crucial for Australia's energy independence. Unlocking our true potential would secure domestic gas supplies and position us as a leader in energy exports and lower energy costs, which would bring much-needed relief as the cost of energy only continues to climb. Yet we received absolutely nothing. Nothing in that space, Madam Speaker. The Territory needs more access to affordable and reliable air travel. For too long, it has been too hard and too expensive for people to get to the Territory, whether it's for business or leisure. And we've had some movement in this space, Madam Speaker, with our government recently welcoming several new flight routes, but we simply need more. Flight routes are such an important step towards making the Territory the best place in the country that we know it can be to visit, live, work and invest. Increased connectivity boosts our local economy by increasing business opportunities and attracting tourists. This will grow our tourism sector, create new job opportunities for Territorians and make it easier for people to visit their loved ones. Which leads me to my next point, Madam Speaker. We need to grow our population and give people incentive to stay here. And Madam Speaker, the federal government is not recognising the Northern Territory at all. There are people leaving left, right and centre. In addition, streamlining our processes for migration to the Territory will also play a key role in rebuilding our economy. Making it easier for people to migrate here could help with skill shortages, even in remote and rural areas, and they might stay in the Territory long term. But as we know, the federal government won't entertain the caps that they impose on the Territory for our international students to assist with migration, and that is an absolute shame. Madam Speaker, we know in the Territory the weather can be unpredictable and sometimes we face those intense and extreme weather events. Federal investment in this space is so important. And we know that year after year, when during the wet season the Stewart Highway is cut off, we have empty shelves in our supermarkets with very little federal investment to put into those roads to ensure that we can put food on the shelves in the supermarket. We just don't get the look in that we need from Canberra. Madam Speaker, we are fortunate to live on land rich in critical minerals, and we must use this to our advantage. The Territory has the potential to be a leading role in securing resources which are vital to so much, and this will also drive economic growth. And not to mention our mineral exploration spending has fallen by almost half compared to this time under a Labor government, according to the latest figures of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. We deserve much more than offcuts thrown at us from the budget. We deserve real investment in our future, investment that will help build infrastructure, create jobs and unlock the full potential of our region. This will be critical as we continue on what we promised Territorians, that we would rebuild our economy and restore our lifestyle. So, Madam Speaker, we will continue fighting for a better future for all Territorians. And to receive such little support from the federal government is unbelievable. But that won't stop this Northern Territory Whānaki government fighting with the federal government to get our fair share. We are a critical part of this nation, and the Albanese Labor government has shown complete disregard for the Northern Territory. And I cannot believe that Senator Malarndirri McCarthy was on the radio this morning threatening Territorians, threatening us for standing up for Territorians. I mean, that is what she should be doing, and she's not doing that. She's too busy throwing pot shots at the government. Senator McCarthy, Marion Scrimshaw and Luke Gosling need to take a good, hard look at themselves, because what have they delivered for the Northern Territory? A very measly budget. And the fact that the Leader of the Opposition cannot see how this budget has let Territorians down just beggars belief. The fact she is so blind to the fact that this is just not good enough for Territorians. They are standing here today defending the federal government's decisions on this measly budget. It is absolutely disgraceful. This federal government announcement is just another example of Labor failing the Territory and kicking us when we're down, after we were officially ranked the worst performing economy in the country under Labor. And it doesn't help that Labor has left us on a track record to the largest debt in the Northern Territory's history, with unfunded operational expenditure and further cost blowouts on Labor's pet projects, revealing our forecast accessible borrowing for 28-29 projected to hit the $15 billion mark. $15 billion. Wow. Madam Speaker, we're working hard to turn this around, but we need so much more support in the Northern Territory. We've outlined our clear strategy to rebuild our economy, which has those 5 key pillars, and this includes being the best place to do business, building a bigger, better workforce, and delivering for Australia, unlocking regional growth and connecting the Territory. And we needed the federal government to come in behind us and help us to do that, because after 8 years of Labor, they have let down every single Territorian, and it is a disgrace. Labor had the chance, the federal Labor government had the chance to tell Territorians that they truly do care, and that they weren't just going to, as Albanese does, fly into Alice Springs, make an announcement of some maintenance money and then fly back out again, like he actually cares. We know he doesn't. Territorians know he doesn't. We need the backing. We actually need a new federal government. We have a new Territory government who have done more in 8 months than this Labor government did in 8 years. And now we need a new federal government who will do the same, who will support the Territory to get Territorians back on track, for it to be the best place in the world, which we know it can be, to visit, live, work and invest. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Fanny Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand before you this morning following last night's budget announcement with a heavy heart and deep disappointment. But, Madam Speaker, I have to say that I'm not at all surprised by the Albanese Labor government failing the people of the Northern Territory once again. The 2025-26 federal budget, delivered just yesterday, has once again failed the people of the Northern Territory. While the rest of Australia celebrates economic growth and prosperity, our Territory has once again been left behind, forgotten and ignored. This budget is not just a missed opportunity, it is an absolute betrayal of the hard-working Territorians who deserve better. Let's look at some facts. The Australian Local Government Association's plea for $1.1 billion per year to enable infrastructure and unlock housing supply has fallen on deaf ears. A measly contribution over 3 years for remote housing and urgent repairs to social housing in the Northern Territory. This pittance is an insult to our communities facing severe overcrowding and substandard living conditions. The budget provides inadequate housing support for Territorians with no guarantee that the NT will receive an equitable portion of these funds. Once again, we're left fighting for scraps. The budget fails to address the unique challenges faced by the NT, including our vast distances, sparse population, and the need for significant infrastructure investment. There's no mention of support for our key industries or initiatives to boost economic diversification in the Northern Territory. The budget details limited infrastructure investment. Only $200 million for highway upgrades were announced, which is inadequate for the NT's needs. There is a lack of attention to the First Nations issues, confirming the perceived decline in the government's interest and commitment to First Nations people, despite previous promises of reform. There is a failure to address the unique challenges. The budget does not adequately address the NT's specific needs, such as its vast distances, sparse population, and significant infrastructure requirements. The federal budget does not fully meet the expectations or requirements of the Northern Territory, particularly in those areas and particularly for our First Nations people. This budget demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding that the NT's needs and potential. It is a stark reminder that we are often an afterthought in Canberra's corridors of power. To the federal government, I say this: the Northern Territory is not just a vast expanse on a map. We are real people with needs and with real potential. Your failure to invest in our future is not just short-sighted, it is economically irresponsible. We demand better, we demand a fair go, and we demand a budget that recognises the unique value and challenges of the Northern Territory. To my fellow Territorians, I say that we have been let down, but we are not defeated. Our resilience and spirit have seen us through tough times before, and they will see us through again. As you have seen with our Whanokiraro CLP government, and as you will continue to see, we will continue to fight for the people of the Territory and the recognition and support that we deserve. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any other speakers? Member for Blaine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on last night's very disappointing budget, which left Territorians out in the cold. I'd like to just engage in a brief history lesson, if I may. So the former member for Solomon, Natasha Griggs, was in opposition for 2 terms and, sadly, only in government for 1 term. And that's something that I think, we Palmerstonians, I think we really missed out in the loss of Natasha Griggs from the federal parliament. But I just want to put on the record and draw to the attention of the House that when that 1 term that she was in government, she was able to deliver something that helps Palmerstonians that work in the city every day that we appreciate. And this morning I was able to benefit from her legacy. When she was in government, she delivered for Territorians the extension and duplication of the Tiger-Brennan Drive, which increased the average speed of people travelling to and from the CBD between Palmerston and the CBD from 60 kilometres an hour to, I think it's the speed limit along there is 80 kilometres an hour.
Take your seat, Member for Blaine. What's your point of order, Member for Wadja?
110 relevance. The Treasurer, who I respect, has brought in a motion about this budget. We don't care about Natasha Griggs.
Please continue.
Madam Speaker. So
Can we
I really
calm down?
appreciate the delivery, and that's just an example of something that can happen when you have a federal member that fights for Territorians. This government is dedicated to growing our own source revenue, but with the legacy of the last 2 terms of Labor government, there's a lot of work to do in that space. And until we get there, we unfortunately have to really rely on our friends in Canberra to come through for us. And we need strong representatives from the Territory in the federal government who can go into bat and deliver for Territorians with the infrastructure, health, education, funding that we need to deliver for Territorians. And Natasha Griggs, in a short term in government, was able to do that, and we appreciate that. Now, I look around the current member for Solomon, Luke Gosling. and I struggle to see what he's delivered. You know, I look at the current budget that was delivered last night. He promised us in Palmerston a fishing club on the banks of the Elizabeth River. He promised that. There's nothing. There's not even a plan. There's no announcement. No federal minister standing out there with him, you know, announcing this mythical fishing club. You know, sadly, it just seems that he doesn't have any influence in his party room to be able to deliver for Palmerston and for Territorians. Now, speaking about senators, the Labor senator for the Labor senator.
Stop the interjections, please. What's your point of order? Sorry, member for Blaine, member for Karama.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The continual interjection by the Leader of the Opposition in waiting is unwarranted.
Yes, I think you're right. Let's keep the interjections to a zero, and we've only got a few minutes till lunch, so that's not a huge expectation. Please continue.
So where was I? The Labor senator for the Territory, Malarndirri McCarthy, minister in the federal government. Unfortunately, it seems like she doesn't have, well, except for in the seat of 𝘩𝘢𝘵𝘇, I think she's delivered for you, Leader of the Opposition in waiting. But for the rest of the Territory...
Take your seat, member for Blaine. What's your point of order, member for 𝘠𝘠?
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 1, use of correct parliamentary terms. I'm not the Leader of the Opposition. That's my colleague, the member for Arnhem.
You're quite right.
For 𝘠𝘠.
Take your seat. Member for Blaine, please refer to the members as they are.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I withdraw that statement. But going back to the federal minister, the Labor senator, Malarndirri McCarthy, who has been unable to deliver for Territorians. I've driven the Stuart Highway and the Barkly Highway, and that highway that was left to us by the previous government is very sadly a mess. The member for Nelson spoke about the potholes that are damaging cars every day, even as he was driving past himself. We need more money.
Stop the interjections.
We need more money to fix up that road for our cattle trucks, for our tourism, for all of the people that need to drive on those roads, including your constituents, member for 𝘠𝘠𝘳. And sadly, there's crumbs